Today, I want to talk about what I think is the scariest IJN torpedo boat in World of Warships Legends, and that is the Tier 7 Premium IJN destroyer Kirisame. Now, luckily, for all of you watching this video, or maybe unluckily, the Kirisame is probably also the rarest ship in the game. The only way to obtain it was, a few months or even a year ago. There were some crates that you could buy, and each crate contained a tiny little chance to produce the Kirisame. So as a consequence, not many people have this destroyer. In fact, I have not seen one since the release, but there are a few people who have it, including all of the community contributors and anybody that was lucky enough to gamble on those crates and pull this thing out. Maybe a disappointment to those of you who would like this ship. Certainly it would be nicer if you could obtain ships by directly buying them for doubloons rather than gambling doubloons on containers for a random chance at getting it. But here we are today with the Kirisame. Now, the reason I say it is the scariest IJN torpedo boat requires a little bit of explanation and also requires some explanation about the mainline IJN torpedo boats. So you can see here that we've launched our first set of torpedoes at the Harbin. We were kind of thinking he might slow down and smoke up, which is exactly what he's done. Now, the Harbin, of course, does not have any kind of sonar or any way to detect incoming torpedoes. So he is essentially a sitting duck. He's never going to see these torpedoes until they're right on top of him. And by that time, it will be far too late. Let's take a look here as they enter the smoke screen. They will make contact with the Harbin's hull. And, well, Dev Strike, First Blood. Well, okay, maybe not a Dev Strike. Yes, a Dev Strike. The game did register that as a Dev Strike. 25,000 damage done from 2 torpedoes and a sunk Harbin. Now, there is a good reason that these torpedoes are very different from the mainline IJN torpedo boats. If you think of the mainline, it starts with the Izokaze at Tier 3, we've got the Mutsuki at Tier 4, followed by the Fubuki at Tier 5, and at that tier, Tier 5, that's where the mainline sort of comes into its own. From Tier 5 onward, Fubuki, Akatsuki, Kagero, Yugamo, and finally Shimakaze at the Legendary tier. I think the player base widely regards these torpedo boats to be the scariest destroyers in the game. I don't think that at all, but I recognize that a lot of people do, and I think the primary reason for that is because the main line has conventional torpedoes that are reasonably fast, maybe not as fast as some other torpedoes. They have great range. Of course, the destroyers also have great concealment. And then when the torpedoes make contact, they hit incredibly hard. That's true all up and down the line. But here's the problem with the mainline torpedoes, and this is sort of my hot take on the subject. You can let me know if you disagree in the comments, but anytime I see a Fubuki, Akatsuki, Kagero, Yugamo, or even Shimakaze, I generally don't consider them to be a credible threat, regardless of what ship I'm playing. Could be a cruiser, battleship, or other destroyer. I don't regard them as a credible threat most of the time. Why not? Well, it's partly because I think the IJN torpedo boats are the worst played destroyers in this game. I don't have any data to back that up. That is purely anecdotal. It comes from my own observations. You might disagree, but I really think that is the case. They are the worst played, and also, well, I think the reason they're the worst played is because they are the most popular destroyers in this game. You see one in practically every match you load into. In fact, there's one right there, an Akatsuki. We're going to shoot at him with our main guns. They're not very effective with this torpedo hull build, but in fact, I don't even think we're going to get the kill. The other destroyer gets that. But anyway, they are not credible threats in my mind because A, they're not played very well, and B, while their torpedoes do hit hard, they often have an alpha strike per torpedo that exceeds 20k. while they do hit hard, they are, in my opinion, among the easiest torpedoes in this game to dodge. And the reason for that is because their detectability by sea is usually quite high. It's around 1.8 kilometers, which is nearly, 2 kilometers. That's plenty of time to see the torpedoes and maneuver out of their way. The only thing you need to do is pay attention to the map, essentially, if you're in a battleship. And as long as you know the direction that the IJN torpedo boat is in, it becomes incredibly easy to maneuver and dodge their torpedoes. Plus, in addition to being spotted from nearly 2 kilometers in the water, the mainline IJN torpedoes tend to spread out quite a bit. There is RNG that influences the spread of your torpedoes. I think I've said this before. Somebody in the comments section disagreed with me, but no, RNG is the reason why you see differences between the distance between torpedoes in your spread. And the IJN torpedoes on the main line tend to spread out a lot. So, they're spotted from very far away. They spread out a lot. That makes them the easiest torpedoes in the game to dodge, or among the easiest torpedoes. Things like the American torpedoes on the Summers, much scarier. They have a much lower detectability, nearly 1 kilometer. So by the time you see them, you have less time to dodge. And I think those torpedoes are a lot more terrifying, even though they don't hit for quite as much. Now, the Kirisame is very different from the main line of IJN destroyers because it can fit deep water torpedoes. Now, deep water torpedoes do have one disadvantage, and that is they cannot damage destroyers, but they can damage cruisers, battleships, and aircraft carriers. They hit for a maximum damage of about 20k. They have a 16.5 kilometer range, so they can cover the entire map, and there are 8 of them. Plus, if you'd like to, you can switch out the smokescreen generator for the torpedo reload booster, and then you can put, 16 of these torpedoes in the water at once, but only once per game. I think you only get 1 charge of the reload booster. Now, deep water torpedoes are much scarier than conventional torpedoes because their detectability by sea is 0.8 kilometers, which means by the time these torpedoes are spotted on the enemy's screen, there is no opportunity for them to maneuver at all. They absolutely have to know that the torpedoes are coming in advance, and they have to completely dodge the torpedoes before they even render on the screen. This is basically next to impossible, and that makes the Kirisame's torpedoes very, very scary indeed. In fact, this ship reminds me quite a bit of the World of Warships PC version of the Asashio, which is a Tier 8 destroyer in that game. And when I first started playing PC, I didn't actually realize the Asashio had deep water torpedoes on there, but it does. In contrast to the version of the Asashio we have in Legends, which has conventional torpedoes and is just kind of sort of a middle-of-the-road IJN destroyer, in my opinion, in this game. But on PC, the Asashio is widely feared by battleships because you cannot see its torpedoes before they hit you. And take a look at this Azuma. This is a cruiser who normally probably does not worry about torpedoes, and I think Azuma even has sonar. But if he doesn't have that sonar running, he has no advanced warning whatsoever of these torpedoes, and by the time he does spot them, they're right next to his hull, and all it takes is, 1, 2, 3 torpedoes to take him out for another dev strike. That's 2 cruisers we've dev struck in this game because of these torpedoes, and this is primarily the reason I wanted to show you this match. Most of the time, you don't worry about IJN torpedoes in your cruiser because they are so detectable, and because cruisers are so much more maneuverable than, say, battleships. The IJN torpedoes are, I think, easiest to dodge in a cruiser, even if you don't have sonar up, just because you get such advanced warning. But you don't get that with the Kirisame's deep water torpedoes. And with that 16.5 kilometer range, they could easily, unexpectedly hit you all the way across the map and you'd have no warning of it. So that is what I think makes the Kirisame the scariest IJN torpedo boat. If you ever see one in a game and you're playing a battleship or a cruiser, it's got to be your priority target. Otherwise, it can wreak havoc with its torpedoes. Now, of course, torpedoes, I think, are not as reliable as guns. And when you have the torpedo boat hull with the 16.5 kilometer deep water torps on the Kirisame, what you get for guns is 3 turrets of essentially Akizuki guns. Now, Akizuki guns are really, really good, but the guns on the Kirisame have a very long reload. I think it's 3.5, 4 seconds compared to the actual Akizuki's reload, which is, less than 2 seconds? So the DPM is much, much worse, and these guns really don't do a lot of damage. They're not very reliable. So when you play the Kirisame with these deep water torpedoes, the torpedoes are indeed the main armament. And sometimes torpedoes aren't really enough. Although this game is really anybody's game at this point. There's less than 4 minutes left to go. We've got a full health Amagi who is pushing out here. We can see he's going to turn and go straight, but we make a mistake. It's a little bit tricky sometimes to launch torpedoes at targets that are maneuvering and correctly predict how much they're going to accelerate. Unfortunately, I did not correctly account for the Amagi's acceleration on this torpedo launch. The torpedoes themselves are fast. They're nearly 70 knots, but you do have to aim them correctly, and in this case, well, we're only going to get one torpedo hit right near the Amagi's stern. Now, that torpedo is going to do a fair bit of damage. That's, 11K there, and it starts a flood, but it's not enough to take the Amagi down. I think 2 or 3 torpedoes would have taken him down if we had led the spread just a little bit better, but we didn't, and so the Amagi survives and he's able to get away. This, I think, is where the loss that my team is about to have was crystallized. I think if I had landed more torpedoes on that Amagi and sunk it, we very well might have won this game. Right now, though, the Amagi's guns are pointed away, so there's no reason not to open fire with our main guns. We stop there to juke his return salvo and smoke up, and we've got him lit on perma-fire. Our other DD teammate is launching some fruitless torpedoes at him. They're not going to make contact, and the Amagi is more or less able to get away. There's still another destroyer left alive on the enemy team, and also a Baltimore, which is, a bit of a problem, considering it's a radar cruiser. But if we get a good torpedo lineup on him, we may be able to take him out. Unfortunate thing is that there are less than 2 minutes left to go in this game, and the Amagi is still alive. If the Amagi were sunk, then this next sequence might have gone a little bit better for me. Trying to push up and maybe get some torpedoes on the Amagi. I'm desperately launching them between the gap. They do have 16.5 kilometer range, so there's no way he can outrun them. If he goes in a straight line, there is a chance that one of them will hit, but if he turns around and goes, behind one of those islands on either side, then the torpedoes are completely going to miss. And here we get spotted by the Northern Dragon. And that is going to spell our demise, not because of the Northern Dragon, but because of that. I'm sure we could have taken out this Northern Dragon. There's no doubt in my mind, but we are not going to be able to because of that hit the Amagi got on us. We lost all our HP, and now we're about to go down. One of these guys just has to tap us with a single shell, and that's it. Although we do get the high caliber and Confederate medal thanks to our dev striking 2 cruisers, dealing some damage to a battleship, and then dealing some damage to a destroyer. Not a huge amount of raw damage done, only 103,000, but remember, this game rewards you based on the percentage of an enemy ship's HP that you take away, and we took away 100% of the HP of 2 separate cruisers. We did, a fair chunk of HP to the Amagi and to the destroyer. So even though the damage isn't super high in this game, it was pretty effective damage, given it was 100% of 2 different ships. So we get a lot of credits, and we get 2,000 base XP on a loss, which I think is pretty good. So the Kirisame, even though we did lose this game, you can see the potential of how scary this is as an IJN torpedo boat. If If you see one in the water, look out. And if this ship ever becomes available again to pick up for, some way that doesn't involve sort of gambling on random crates, then I highly recommend it. I hope you enjoyed this video. If so, give it a thumbs up. Consider subscribing if you haven't already, and I'll see you next time. Goodbye.